She had said, "Life grows even in the darkest soil," and she had meant it as the specific factual observation of a woman who had spent her entire adult life studying exactly this, not as poetry, as botany. She had been studying plant systems since she was 12, which was the specific age at which her father's gardener had begun taking her seriously as an apprentice rather than managing her as the landowner's daughter who was underfoot. And the taking seriously had produced the specific outcome of serious study, which was a woman who understood, at a level that most men with formal credentials did not, the particular mechanisms by which growth happened in conditions that were not designed for it. She had published 2 papers under a masculine pseudonym that had been cited in 3 subsequent academic works without anyone understanding who had written them. She had a 3rd paper half-written in the journals she kept, which was about the specific relationship between soil drainage, root structure, and crop yield in conditions of high moisture, which was, coincidentally, exactly the kind of research that the northern swamp territory that Sebastian was banishing her to would have provided excellent material for. She was aware of the coincidence. She was also aware that she was not going to the northern swamp territory. She had understood this in the specific moment of placing the ring on the table, not the moment before, not some earlier moment of planning, but that specific moment in which the full picture of what Sebastian was and what she had been inside the marriage with him had organized itself into the particular clear-eyed understanding she brought to things once she allowed herself to see them. He had not trusted her. He had not loved her in the way that love required seeing. He had loved something he had projected onto her, some version of her that was manageable and contained, and that did not have the specific quality of a woman whose mind was operating at full capacity. He had banished her to the swamp to rot. She was going to go somewhere else. But before we go to the Southern Empire, before we follow Sebastian 3 years later through the overgrown gates of the empty Blackwood estate, and then through the southern border into a land that had been transformed, I need to ask you something. If someone banished you to a place designed to diminish you, and you had the knowledge and the resources to go somewhere that would value you instead, what would you do with the first morning? Drop your answer in the comments. Because Rosalind crossed the southern border on the first morning, she had not packed for the swamp. She had packed for the south. Subscribe and hit the bell. And tell me where you are watching from tonight. Your city, your country. Let me know who is in the room now. Let's begin. Her father had been a man of the land, in the specific, comprehensive sense of someone who understood the land as the primary thing, and everything else as derivative of it. He had been a count of modest title and significant agricultural property, and he had treated the agricultural property with the seriousness that it deserved, and that most men of his social standing did not give it, because most men of his social standing understood land as the thing that generated income through tenant payments, and did not concern themselves with the specific mechanisms of how the income was generated. Her father had concerned himself. He had passed the concern to Rosalind with the specific enthusiasm of a man who had found, in his eldest daughter, someone who received the concern with the quality he had been hoping to transmit it to. She had received it fully. She had been 12 when the gardener had started taking her seriously, and she had been 14 when she had understood, through the specific mechanism of watching a field recover from blight, that what she was interested in was not gardening, but the underlying science of it, the biology, the chemistry, the specific engineering of water and soil and root that produced the outcome of growth. Her father had found her tutors. The tutors had been, in the specific quality that good tutors were, people who were better at the subject than at teaching it, and she had learned from them in the specific way that she learned best, which was by asking questions they found inconvenient and then going to find the answers herself when they could not provide them. She had been building the understanding for 20 years by the time Sebastian banished her. The understanding was thorough. Sebastian had been presented to her at 24 as a suitable match, which he was by the specific accounting of the world that assessed suitable matches, the title, the property, the standing, the reputation for honor that his family had maintained across several generations. She had assessed him with the clear eyes she brought to assessments, and had found, in the assessing, a man who was genuinely intelligent in some respects and genuinely limited in others. The limitation was the specific limitation she recognized from her experience with tutors, which was the limitation of a person who had organized their intelligence around the confirmation of what they already believed, rather than around the discovery of what was true. He believed in his family's assessment of everything. His family's assessment of her had been, she had understood early, that she was acceptable but not ideal, that the botany was eccentric, that the published papers, which she had not disclosed were hers, were the kind of thing that gave ladies intellectual pretensions that made them difficult to manage, that her father's land was good, but her family's social standing was not quite at the level that Thornfield required. The Dowager Duchess Georgina had communicated this assessment in the specific way of a woman who understood that direct communication was less effective than the particular management of small signals, the slightly too long pause before acknowledging Rosalind's contribution to a conversation, the specific quality of the smile that communicated tolerance rather than warmth, the arrangement of the dinner seating that placed Rosalind outside the circle of significance. Rosalind had read all of it. She had continued her work. She had maintained the marriage with the specific competence she brought to things that required maintenance, had managed the household relationships with the social intelligence she had developed from years of observing human systems, had been genuinely trying to be in the marriage with the honest investment of someone who had made a commitment. She had also published a third paper, under the pseudonym, about nitrogen fixation in root systems. The paper had been well received. Sebastian had not known she wrote it. This was, she had understood, the specific quality of the problem. He had not known because he had not asked, and he had not asked because he had not thought to ask, and he had not thought to ask because the version of her he had organized himself around was not the version that was writing the papers. He had married the quiet duchess. He had not met the botanist. The feast at which the dowager had collapsed had been the winter feast, which was the specific occasion of the year that organized the household's social calendar around itself, and that required the attendance of the significant guests, and that was the specific kind of occasion that required careful management of many moving parts. Rosalind had been managing the parts. She had been aware, from the quality of Melissa's movements across the evening, that something was being organized, which was the specific awareness of a woman who had been watching the household's dynamics for 3 years, and who understood what organized movement looked like versus the ordinary movement of social occasion. She had not known what specifically she had been watching. The dowager had collapsed at the end of the 3rd course. Melissa had discovered the vial in Rosalind's jewelry box with the specific quality of a discovery that had been organized in advance, too rapid, too certain, too performed. Rosalind had recognized it. She had also understood, in the moment of recognition, that the recognition was not going to be sufficient, because the people who needed to believe the performance were already predisposed to believe it, and the performance was tailored to their predisposition. She had said she was innocent. Sebastian had not believed her. She had watched him not believe her with the specific attending quality of a woman who was receiving information about a person she had been married to for 3 years, and who was understanding, in the receiving, the full picture of what the 3 years had been. He had not trusted her. He had never trusted her. The love had not included the specific form of seeing that trust required. She had placed the ring on the table. She had said the thing about the dark soil and meant it as botany. She had walked out of the feast. She had gone to her rooms, and she had taken 30 minutes. The 30 minutes had been the specific 30 minutes of a woman who was doing the accounting of her situation with the full clarity of someone who was seeing it without the management of hope. The accounting was, she was banished to the northern swamp with no title and no resources except the ones she had always had, which were her knowledge and her mind and the specific understanding of plant systems that had been building since she was 12. She had the journals, she had the unpublished research, she had the specific contacts, through the academic world of the pseudonymous papers, with people in the Southern Empire who had read her work and who had been corresponding with the pseudonym about the specific irrigation problems the southern desert territories were having. She had been corresponding with Emperor Cassian's agricultural office for 8 months, not as Rosalind Thornfield, as R. Ashford, the agricultural scholar whose papers on drainage and root structure had been circulating in the southern academic community with the specific quality of work that was genuinely useful to people who were managing the specific problems the South was managing. She had received a letter 3 months ago from the Emperor's office inquiring whether R. Ashford would be interested in a consultancy position to address the southern famine that was developing in the desert territories. She had been considering how to respond. She had her answer now. She had packed in the 30 minutes with the specific efficiency of someone who had been thinking about what she actually needed for some time, and who knew, in the emergency, exactly what that was: the journals, the research notes, the correspondence with the Southern office. The specific botanical samples she had been collecting and preserving for the unpublished paper, practical clothing for travel, and for field work. She had not packed the Duchess's gowns. She had not needed them. She had crossed the southern border at dawn on the second day. Not through the official border crossings, which would have required documentation that identified her as the banished Duchess of Thornfield. Through the specific agricultural border territory that she had learned about from the journals of a botanist who had studied the southern flora and who had described the crossing routes in the specific practical way of a field researcher. She had written ahead. She had written to the Emperor's agricultural office, the night of the banishment, from a posting house on the southern road, under the name R. Ashford, accepting the consultancy position and providing a timeline for arrival. She had arrived on the third day. The agricultural office had been expecting R. Ashford. They had not been expecting a woman, which was the specific quality of all encounters with the pseudonymous work, the surprise, the adjustment, the particular moment of a person receiving the information that the scholar they had been corresponding with was not the person they had imagined. The office director had adjusted within approximately 30 seconds. He had been a man who was managing a famine and who had been waiting for the person who had written the papers on drainage and root structure and who was now looking at the person who had written them, and the specific urgency of the famine had organized his response. He had said, "Can you start tomorrow?" "Yes," she had said. The South had the quality she had identified from the letters, the specific quality of a place that was struggling with a problem she understood, and that had the conditions for addressing the problem if the addressing was organized correctly. The desert territories were not. She had understood from the letters, and confirmed in the first weeks, genuinely uncultivable. They were cultivated incorrectly. The specific mistake was in the irrigation. The channels were designed for volume rather than for distribution, which produced the particular outcome of flooding in some areas and drought in adjacent ones, which was the specific problem that her drainage research had addressed in the context of northern swamp conditions, and which was, she had understood in the first week, the same fundamental problem expressed in inverse conditions. She had written the solution, not immediately. She was precise about her work, which meant she observed the conditions thoroughly before proposing anything, which meant the first month was the month of observation and the second month was the month of the first proposal. The first proposal had been received with the specific quality of an organization that had been waiting for something useful and that had found it. The pilot territory had been implemented in the third month. She had walked the pilot territory every morning for 6 weeks, with the quality she brought to fieldwork, which was the quality of someone who understood that the gap between theory and practice was where the actual knowledge lived and who was committed to living in that gap. The pilot territory had grown. The specific outcome had been visible in the 5th month, the first significant crop yield from territory that had not produced in 3 years. The Emperor had come to see it. She had met him in the 5th month, in the specific context of a man who had come to observe a result he had been told about, and who was encountering the person who had produced it. He had asked her questions. The questions had been the right questions, which was the specific quality of a person who was genuinely curious, and who understood enough to ask the questions that produced useful information. She had answered them. They had walked the territory together for 2 hours. He had said, at the end of the 2 hours, that he would like to fund the implementation of the system across all the desert territories. She had said yes, on the condition that she had the authority to implement correctly, which was the specific condition of a woman who had been precise about her work for 20 years and who understood that partial implementation produced worse outcomes than no implementation. He had agreed. The implementation had taken 2 years. The transformation of the South had the quality she had designed it to have, which was the quality of something that was built on the actual mechanisms of the thing being claimed. She had not promised miracle. She had promised specific outcomes for specific inputs, and she had delivered specific outcomes, and the specific outcomes had produced the particular result of a land that was genuinely changed, rather than a land that was performing change. The golden wheat and the vineyards were real. She had engineered them to be real. The Southern Empire was genuinely flourishing in the specific way of a place whose agricultural foundation had been addressed by someone who understood agricultural foundations. The Emperor had given her the medal at the end of the 2nd year, at the specific occasion of the first full harvest across all the implemented territories, with the quality of a man who understood what he was honoring. She had received it with the quality of a woman who understood what she had done. The gown of emerald and gold had been a choice she had made for the banquet, not vanity. but the specific acknowledgement that she was now operating at a level that required the appropriate dress, and that the appropriate dress communicated something true about her position. She had dressed for her position. Her position was significant. Sebastian had arrived at the southern border in the spring of the 3rd year. She had known he was coming. The southern intelligence network that had developed around the emperor's court had the specific quality of intelligence networks that are well run, and a Thornfield duke traveling through the southern territories with the quality of a man on a desperate mission was not invisible. She had chosen not to change anything about the evening she had been planning. The royal banquet was a regular occasion in the southern court, and she was the person who had transformed the South's agricultural foundation, and the banquet was the specific context in which that was acknowledged, and she was not going to reorganize the banquet because Sebastian had arrived. She had been at the head of the banquet in the appropriate position of someone who had the position she had, and who was present in it fully. She had been in conversation with the emperor when the doors had opened and Sebastian had pushed through. She had watched him cross the room. He had the quality she had not seen on him in 3 years, because the quality she had known on him was the quality of a man in possession of his certainty, and this was the other quality, the specific desperation of a man who had lost the certainty and whose face was carrying the full weight of 3 years of wrong. He went to his knees. She looked at him with the eyes she had, not the eyes of 3 years ago, the eyes of a woman who had engineered the restoration of a famine-stricken desert, who had walked the fields every morning for 2 years, who had published the research under her own name now, and who had received the Imperial Medal of Honor, and who was sitting beside the Emperor of the Southern Territories. She had heard everything he said. "I know the truth," he said. "Melissa has been punished," my mother confessed. "I thought you were suffering in the northern house. Please, come back to Thornfield. I will restore your crown." She had let him say all of it. She had received it with the attending quality of someone who was listening carefully and who was being precise about what she heard, which was the voice of a man who understood that he had been wrong and who had not yet understood the full dimensions of what the wrongness had cost. She looked at him with the specific clarity of accurate understanding. "You banished me to the swamp to die, Sebastian," she said. Her voice had the quality it had in the field, which was the quality of someone who was stating observable fact. "You thought I would rot without your name." She had thought about the ring on the table and the things she had said about dark soil. "But you forgot that I am a daughter of the soil." She looked at the room, at the golden wheat on the tables, and the emperor beside her, and the medal at her neck. "I didn't go to your other house to weep," she said. "I went to a kingdom that actually values my mind." She had thought about 12 years old, and the gardener taking her seriously, and the nitrogen fixation paper, and the drainage journals, and the 2 years of walking the fields at dawn. "You cannot restore a crown to a woman who has already built her own throne." She looked at him with the full clarity. "Stand up, Duke Sebastian," she said. "You are blocking my light." She turned. She walked to her seat beside the emperor. The banquet continued. She accepted the wine from the server with the quality of someone who was entirely present in the occasion she was in. The emperor said something to her about the northern expansion of the irrigation system, which was the specific project she had been thinking about for the past month, and which he had been asking her to consider. "Yes," she said. "I have been working through the problem. The northern soil composition is different from the desert conditions, which means the drainage approach requires modification." He was interested. She told him about the modification. The banquet continued around them. Sebastian had been escorted out by the guards, which she was aware of in the peripheral way of being aware of things that were not the primary thing. The primary thing was the northern expansion and the soil composition problem, and the conversation with the emperor and the banquet. She was entirely present in the primary thing. She had built this. She was in it. The wheat on the tables had grown from the soil she had helped restore. The land outside the windows had been transformed by the work she had done. She was the golden alchemist, and the imperial medal was at her neck, and the emperor was asking her good questions, and she had good answers, and the evening was good, and she was entirely in it. She looked at the medal. She thought about the journals she had packed in the 30 minutes. She had been right about the dark soil. Life had grown. Tell me in the comments, which moment stayed with you? Was it the ring on the table and the thing about dark soil, the first morning crossing the southern border, the pilot territory in the 5th month, the golden wheat and the imperial medal, or the northern expansion problem and the good evening? Drop it below. I want to know what you're carrying from this one. And tell me where you're watching from, your city, your country. Let me know who is in the room tonight. Subscribe and hit the bell. Because the next story opens with a woman who discovers, in her late father's study, a letter he wrote to her the night she was born. And the letter has never been opened, and she understands, reading it, that her father knew something about her that she did not know about herself. I'll see you there.